welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist. And I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. So today it's a bite-sized episode and it is me, and I'm going to be talking all about control and eating disorders. But before I launch into this episode, I just wanted to remind you about our event coming up on Saturday, the 30th of September 2023. It's now online. It's going to be from 2 p.m. until 9 p.m. British summer time. So it means that if you are based in the US and other places around the world, you can still join. And it's all about inspiring prevention of eating disorders and body image issues. So this is a great event if you are someone with an interest in eating disorder prevention, if you're a mental health professional, a counsellor, a nutritionist, a dietitian, a personal trainer, or you've just got a passionate interest. So it's going to be a chance to listen to lots of different talks. I brought together 13 different professionals that are working in the field, also some service users. So you're going to get some great quality information, inspiration, guidance, education all around eating disorders prevention. So if you're interested, do click on the link in the show notes. Tickets are just £99. It's a chance to be inspired, uplifted, meet lots of professionals, meet other people who are interested in all of this. Really hope to see you there. So let's talk a bit about eating disorders and control. So an interesting one, and I think it's quite a cliche, isn't it, that eating disorders are often linked with control. And I think it's one aspect of what is underneath an eating disorder, but it is quite complex. And like most things, it's very different for each individual person. So I think no one sets out to use food as a coping strategy. You know, if we're focusing on food, we're focusing on body image, it's usually an unconscious decision, and it becomes something that's quite safe to cling to and focus on, perhaps when life's quite turbulent and there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think what's important to mention as well is it might not just be food that you're controlling in uncertain times of your life. So you might be having rigid routines, checking things, maybe counting, having a very rigid schedule, again, like trying to control aspects of your life when certain aspects just feel so unsafe and uncontrollable. So I guess rather than to kind of beat yourself up and think, why am I being so rigid and controlling? Why am I focusing on food or checking or other things? It's helpful to view this as a way of coping. Okay, it's not a particularly healthy way of coping sometimes, because although in the short term it can make you feel safe, often in the longer term it makes you feel more unsafe and it creates a whole load of other issues. However, it can sometimes just feel like it's the only thing that you can control. So it's almost like a desperate attempt to survive and be okay. It's not about vanity, trying to be selfish or something else. So when you can just view an eating disorder through this lens, it really opens the door to compassion and understanding about eating disorders and what you're doing. So initially, the eating disorder can offer respite and safety, whether that be through distraction and controlling your food portions, or numbing pain, maybe like avoiding feelings that are just too difficult to deal with. And you might think that control actually always just means being very restrictive with your eating. However, I know from many clients that I've worked with that people will often refer to their overeating, emotional eating or binge eating, or other compensatory strategies, maybe overexercise or purging, also being very linked with control. People often say, you know, food is the one thing that is mine and mine alone, like no one else can interfere with this. So it can feel that although your behaviours might feel actually quite out of control, it can still very much feel like this is the one thing that you have that is yours alone, that other people cannot interfere with. And that can bring a sense of kind of safety and comfort. So of course, although that feeling of control can make you feel better short term, quickly it can feel out of control, brings further anguish, further difficulties. And once you're on that food preoccupation path and having lots of rules, etc., it can feel really tricky to leave and walk in a different direction. So let's just talk about all of this a bit more. So uncertainty. Life is uncertain. Life has been very anxiety provoking, particularly in recent years. So when life throws you a curveball, when uncertainty looms, and there's, you just don't know what you're doing, everything can feel like you're dropping the plates. You can just feel really at sea. You can understandably be drawn to controlling something that is truly yours. So a relationship with food and your body is deeply personal and private. No one can make you eat or know exactly the nuances and secret rituals you may have around food. So maybe you're planning, meticulously preparing, scanning menus, reading food labels, writing down the calories in your notebook with goals and dates, deciding special binge foods to devour away from everyone. And all these little behaviours can provide the fabric and structure of your day. And this is a private and secluded world where others cannot influence or dictate. It is your safety and predictable space which cannot be invaded. You feel in control, at least to begin with. And I think what happens is, when we get laser focused with food preoccupation or body goals, life is instantly simplified. So if you're focusing on the steps walked, the foods eaten or not, weights achieved, these become the variables to determine whether your day has gone well or not. And what this means is it simplifies life. So relationship problems, work stresses, life dramas can all blend into the background and feel more distant. You're almost in that protective bubble, which can feel stifling and restrictive in many ways, but also it can feel safe and known. So although your emotions may heighten around food, otherwise you might just feel that other things that are going on in your life don't bother you as much as before. So that kind of focus on food and body image is offering you some kind of safety, some kind of distraction, some kind of numbing. So you get some relief from the wider problems. And I think, again, this is quite an unconscious process. I don't think anyone wakes up and thinks, right, I'm going to restrict food and focus on my body as a way of coping. It can be something that you almost end up doing without having perhaps really thought it through. And it could be in response to more general chronic stress, things like the kind of pandemic. Well, is that more general chronic stress? I think for some people that was acute stress. So I guess it's going to really depend on your situation. But it can be more kind of chronic stress, or it can be in response to more traumatic stress, like out of the blue events like bereavement, maybe bullying, something else. So I think in recent years, with the pandemic, the financial crisis, our busy lives, many people experiencing challenges with their mental health, life has felt very out of control and chaotic. And I think it's no surprise that eating disorder diagnoses and struggles with mental health have really increased so much in the past few years, because so many people have been surviving and not thriving. And I think with the pandemic as well, so many of us were online, being very isolated from people in our lives where we had these kind of meaningful relationships. Everyone went online. There was so much focus on food and body image. And for many people, that's when it was a kind of tipping point into an eating disorder where they may have been struggling before, but it's almost those additional stresses, they were a tipping point over the edge. So food and body image preoccupation for many people has become a kind of safety raft to cling to, along with other coping mechanisms. I think in the pandemic as well, many people were turning to alcohol, becoming, engaging in more sort of checking behaviours, things like obsessive compulsive disorder, all kinds of things, just trying to escape, understandably, just the difficulties and stresses of everyday life. So the numbing and avoidance of feelings does shield and it offers emotional respite. But as you appreciate, when you're cutting yourself off from your feelings, as you might be doing with alcohol or drugs, gambling or working too much, it's very similar when we do this with food and a focus on body image. The feelings don't really go away, but they accumulate under the carpet, often then occasionally flooding out in a tidal wave of emotion that can feel really unbearable. And then, of course, when we experience that tidal wave of emotion, we feel like, okay, this is proof that emotions are unmanageable. I need to go back to avoiding them again, and we kind of re-engage in the coping behaviours. So, time for a short advertisement break. So I know we talk a lot about food freedom on this podcast and how important it is to take care of yourself mentally and physically as you learn to navigate a culture inundated with toxic messaging. So one of the best ways to take care of yourself is through exercise. But I know it can be really hard to find an exercise program that isn't rooted in these toxic messages and doesn't feel triggering. Well, I recently met Katie, the owner of an amazing new exercise company called WeShape. So WeShape doesn't focus on calorie counting, tracking, how much you work out, or making you feel bad about your body to get you motivated. Instead, they create a customized exercise routine for you that helps you connect with and care for your body rather than feel pressure to change it. So they help you to learn to set intentions that come from a place of self-care rather than self-judgment, and they support you every step of the way with an amazing community and live coaching so you can make exercise a self-care practice that helps you feel better in your body and about your body. Plus, they're giving listeners of the show the chance to try it out for 2 full weeks for free. So just head on over to www.weshape.com/freedom or check out the link in the show notes to get started today. So when you numb your emotions, you numb the good bits too. You don't feel the joy, the happiness, the excitement, the contentment in the same way either. You feel numb and separate from life. And I know many of my clients have talked about the time when they were really suffering with their eating disorder and they realise they can't remember big chunks of this time at all, okay, because actually you're just like surviving, you're not thriving when you are so kind of focused on that food and body preoccupation. So what starts out with order and control can quickly spiral into a monster that devours you. As control tightens, the healthy part of you screams for freedom and you will rebel, against repression of self-imposed control. Again, you're left with a bottom line of not feeling enough, and the level of control you desire is almost impossible to achieve. And I think for many of us, we can romanticize the days when we have managed to follow the food rules and push expectations high to do this again. But it's often really impossible to maintain that kind of period, which might have felt like a honeymoon at the beginning. And you're left feeling a failure and increasingly out of control. So what we're using to control doesn't actually help us to control long term. So it's so helpful to understand your eating disorder as a coping strategy to bring greater insight and understanding, because I think you are using food and body image for a reason. You might not be doing this consciously, but it's important to recognize this so you can be more compassionate with yourself. And when you realize it's a coping strategy, it also opens the door to think about other ways of coping. So if you recognize yourself here and you recognize that you're using food and body image as a way to feel in control in an out of control world, just begin to consider how you could process your feelings more helpfully. Now, often something that can really help with this is just slowing down a bit. Often we're spinning so fast on the hamster wheel of life, we don't have time or energy to even think about how we're feeling, to touch base with what's really going on in our hearts. You know, we're just kind of doing, and we're very sort of distracted from what our true meaning and purpose and all the things that bring us joy, etc. So think about how can you slow down and begin to process your feelings a bit more helpfully. Could you journal? For some people, writing things down is really helpful. Could you channel some of your feelings therapeutically through movement or creativity? So I'm definitely not encouraging obsessive exercise here, but just like moving our bodies sometimes in gentle ways can be very, very helpful. Or also just putting time aside to be creative, where you can be alone with your thoughts. Can you talk to a good friend and be more open? I know for myself, being more open with my friends, being more vulnerable, actually being open and honest and genuine with a few trusted people is incredibly helpful for my well-being and incredibly helpful for how I deal with feelings and my overall recovery. And you might also want to consider therapy. You know, that could be an option for you. Therapy can provide a safe space where you can really start to explore some of these deeper issues in more depth. So recovery from an eating disorder, in my opinion, does require a psychological approach. But with support, you can learn new and healthy ways of coping rather than resorting to food or manipulating your body. And actually, when we can seek out those more healthier ways of coping, it really brings a lot more contentment and peace, because those maladaptive coping mechanisms of focusing on food and your body. They're like a life raft that kind of keeping you afloat, but they're not really giving you that full and flourishing life. You're kind of surviving really, and actually you are worth so much more than that. There is so much more of life available to you. So do seek help. Recovery is possible, and if right now therapy isn't the right step for you, just reach out to a friend and be a bit more open in safe places. That's a really good starting point. Okay, so I hope you found this episode helpful. If you're not following me already, do seek me out on Instagram at the eating disorder therapist _. You might also want to join my bite-sized eating disorder therapy for extra content every month, extra podcast and video content, only £5 a month, and you can try it for a week for free first. Hope to see you at our transformational event on Saturday the 30th of September. Remember, it is online. Link is in the show notes to that, and also the Bite Size Therapy too. And I continue to have 50% off my 10 Steps to Intuitive Eating course. The code to give you 50% off is also in the show notes, and do sign up. It's a great way if you want a bit of an introduction to work with me. It has 29 lectures, 25 videos. They're all kind of like bite size, so you can really start to work on your relationship with food, healing yourself, and also getting a real insight into how I work, if you might be interested maybe in doing that on a one-to-one level later on. Okay, thank you so much for listening today, and of course if you enjoy this podcast, I'll be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thanks again, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.